Well, I worked Houston, I worked Corpus Christi, every little town in Longview, man, you name it, I've been there. Really, I've been all over Texas.
When fans first typed 3 simple words into the FBI's online vault, Elvis Aaron Presley, they expected maybe a few dusty clippings, a routine mention, something trivial. They did not expect to find language normally used for spies and traitors, quietly sitting next to the name of the king of rock and roll. One phrase jumped off the screen and punched people in the chest: that Elvis Presley was described as a danger to the security of the United States. Was this a joke? A misunderstanding? Or had the FBI really seen Elvis as some kind of national threat? Right away, you feel the ground shift under your feet, because for most of us, the story ends at the stage lights. We picture the curled lip, the shaking leg, the white jumpsuit, the screaming fans, the love songs. We don't picture typed memos, blacked out lines, and his name buried in the same kind of files used for mobsters, extortionists, and bomb threats. But that's exactly where his name appears. Let's slow down for just a second and explain what this vault really is. It's not some movie prop in a secret basement. It's a real online archive where the FBI uploads declassified files, the kind of paperwork that was once too sensitive for public eyes. Buried in that ocean of documents, fans discovered something strange. Hundreds of pages where Elvis Presley shows up again and again. Some of it looks boring at first glance: reports, letters, internal notes. But the more you read, the more unsettling it becomes. You don't see Elvis being chased for crimes he committed. You see a man permanently surrounded by other people's chaos, by threats, by scams, by angry citizens who wanted the government to stop him, tame him, or use his name for their own gain. One letter sent straight to FBI headquarters is where the story turns from interesting to disturbing. The writer claims to have a background in Army intelligence. He warns that Elvis is corrupting America's youth, arousing sexual passions in teenage girls, and turning concerts into something close to an indecent act. In his eyes, Elvis isn't a singer. He's a weapon aimed at the hearts and bodies of young Americans. Now, the important thing to understand is this: that letter was not the official opinion of the FBI. It was a complaint from a citizen. But it didn't just disappear in a trash bin. It was stamped, logged, and stored with Elvis's name attached to it, so that decades later, it would send chills down the spine of anyone who read it. And that's where the story gets darker, because these files don't just show what the FBI thought. They show what America thought. They show the fear, the moral panic, the belief that one man with a microphone could destroy an entire generation's values. They show how far some people were willing to go, even dragging a federal agency into their hatred of rock and roll. Suddenly, the contrast is painful. On one side, you have Elvis smiling on stage, tossing scarves, kissing cheeks, and pouring his soul into every song. On the other side, in quiet government offices, you have letters branding him a danger, reports about threats, and folders filling up every time someone used his fame as a weapon for extortion or revenge. And this is just the surface, because once you start turning those pages, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. You find stories of blackmail, people trying to cash in on his name, plots that followed him across oceans, files about fraud, extortion, and carefully recorded conversations, all orbiting the same star, Elvis Presley. So the real question isn't, did the FBI hate Elvis? The real question is, what did they see happening around him that was serious enough to document, preserve, and lock away for decades. In the next part of this story, we're going to open one of those files. It begins far from Graceland, in a quiet German town, with Elvis wearing an army uniform and trusting a man who claimed he could fix his skin. What that stranger did next turned into a secret extortion case that almost no fan knew existed until the files finally came out. Elvis Presley thought he was just fixing a problem with his skin. In Germany, serving in the U.S. Army, he wasn't the king on a throne. He was a young man far from home, dealing with the same insecurities any 20-something faces when the cameras go away. His face broke out. The lighting, the close-ups, the magazine covers, all of it made every little blemish feel like a crisis. So when someone told him about a man who could help, he listened. The man's name was Lorenz Johannes Griesel Landau. He presented himself as a skin specialist, a kind of miracle worker who claimed he could treat Elvis's complexion. To a global superstar who lived on his image, that sounded like a blessing. But inside the FBI's paperwork, that blessing shows up as the opening chapter of a quiet nightmare. According to the files, this supposed doctor wasn't what he seemed. There were questions about his real qualifications. There were stories that he behaved inappropriately around Elvis's circle. What began as a treatment arrangement slowly twisted into something darker. A power play built on access, secrets, and the fear of humiliation. At some point, Elvis and his team decided they'd had enough. The relationship ended. The door was supposed to close. It didn't, because that's when the threat started. Griesel Landau allegedly claimed he had material that could destroy Elvis, that he could talk, that he could expose things, that he had the power to cause a scandal. Whether his claims were fully real or partly bluff almost doesn't matter. What matters is that Elvis believed he had something to lose. For a star that famous, the idea of compromising material was more terrifying than a gun. All it would take was one newspaper headline, one rumor, one suggestion that Elvis was involved in something shameful, and the carefully built public image could crack overnight. So Elvis did what a lot of celebrities quietly do when cornered. He tried to make the problem go away. The FBI files show discussions of money changing hands. There's talk of covering travel costs, providing a plane ticket, giving just enough to get this man out of his orbit. The goal wasn't to win. The goal was to escape. But blackmail rarely ends with one payment. The files paint a picture of a man who wouldn't let go. More demands, more pressure, more manipulation. And now the situation wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It had become a potential criminal issue involving threats, interstate communication, and possible extortion. That's how Elvis's private nightmare walked straight into the FBI's world. From the Bureau's perspective, Elvis was not the criminal in this story. He was the victim, a high-value target being squeezed by someone who thought they'd found a golden ticket. So the FBI coordinated with the military, tracked the threats, and carefully documented every step, all while the U.S. Army worried about unfavorable publicity about its most famous soldier. As fans screamed themselves hoarse at concerts, other Americans were writing furious, trembling letters to the authorities. Ministers, parents, community leaders, people who genuinely believed rock and roll was tearing the country apart. The FBI vault shows a steady drip of complaints. Elvis is corrupting the youth. Elvis is indecent. Elvis is lowering the moral defenses of the nation. To them, he's not the boy from Tupelo who made it big. He's the spark that might burn down everything they think America should be. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. For all the noise, the FBI never opened a criminal case on Elvis Presley for his performances. They didn't label him an official threat. They didn't launch some secret operation to shut him down. Instead, the Bureau did what bureaucracies do. They filed the letters, responded politely when necessary, and moved on to the real criminals, the bomb threats, the extortion schemes, the scams swirling around his money. On paper, Elvis is not the villain in these files. He's either the target or the symbol. And while strangers were writing to Hoover begging him to stop this menace, Elvis himself was trying to move in the opposite direction. He wasn't trying to run from law enforcement. He was trying to get closer to it. Elvis loved badges. He collected them, prized them, wore them with pride. Behind the rhinestones and capes was a man who genuinely admired police officers, sheriffs, federal agents. At one point, he even wanted to meet J. Edgar Hoover. The files mention his interest, his requests, his desire to be seen as someone on the side of law and order, not against it. It's a strange, almost tragic contrast. In living rooms across America, people are telling their kids that Elvis represents everything wrong with the world. They're writing to Washington, painting him as a sexual time bomb that might explode the country's morals. Meanwhile, Elvis is walking into the White House, asking President Nixon for a badge, offering himself as someone who can speak out against drugs and the counterculture. He's desperate to be taken seriously by the very system that's quietly storing letters calling him a national danger. And what about Hoover? In those same files, there's no sign of the FBI director being thrilled to meet this superstar. To Hoover, Elvis is described as a flashy entertainer with exotic clothes, more circus than statesman. Hoover keeps his distance. There's courtesy, but no warmth. Respect for Elvis's popularity, but not much interest in his offer to help. So you end up with this strange triangle. Fans who see a hero, critics who see a threat, and a powerful federal machine that mostly sees a file number. But if the FBI never officially labeled Elvis a criminal, if they never launched a campaign to destroy him, how did we end up with all these wild stories that say the Bureau helped him fake his death, turned him into an undercover agent, or hid the full truth about what really happened to him? The answer lies in the next set of pages, and in the way a few real phrases, a few real operations, and a few real scams around Elvis's name were twisted into some of the biggest conspiracy theories in music history. If you only looked at the headlines, you'd think these FBI files proved Elvis was some kind of secret agent, a man who faked his death to work undercover, hiding in the shadows while the rest of the world mourned. That's the story the conspiracy world loves to tell. They point to dramatic phrases and code names, operations, fraud investigations, notes about informants, federal cases that seem to brush against the Presley name. They take scattered facts from real documents and stitch them into a wild movie where Elvis walks off the stage in 1977 and straight into a life as an undercover operative. But when you slow down and really read what's in those files, something very different appears. Take the case that gets twisted the most, the fraud around his private jet maintenance. In some documentaries and online theories, this becomes proof that Elvis was secretly working with federal agents, feeding information to the FBI. They point to an operation with a dramatic name and insist, see, he was part of a sting. The reality is simpler and in many ways sadder. The FBI files show a case where criminals inflated invoices and scammed wealthy clients, including the Presleys, for aircraft maintenance and related costs. Vernon Presley, trying to protect his son's assets, ends up entangled in a complicated financial mess. The Bureau steps in to investigate the con men, track down money, and build a fraud case. Elvis isn't the hunter in that story. He's one more victim on a long list. Then there's the question of badges, informant rumors, and that famous meeting with President Nixon. Some people point to Elvis's love of law enforcement memorabilia and say he wanted those badges because he was already part of some secret operation. But the documents and eyewitness accounts paint a much more human picture. Elvis was obsessed with badges the way some people are obsessed with cars or guns or jewelry. They made him feel official, respected, and connected to a world he admired. He wanted to be seen as someone who could help his country, not undermine it. Was he ever used as a formal FBI informant? The files say no. There is no evidence of Elvis working undercover for the Bureau. No case opened with him as a covert asset. What you do see is a man constantly near the orbit of investigations because of his money, his planes, his exposure to dangerous people, and his sheer size as a public figure. In other words, the FBI wasn't running Elvis. They were protecting him and sometimes just recording the chaos that trailed behind him. What these documents really expose is not a spy thriller, but a pressure cooker. They show a man whose fame made him a magnet for every kind of trouble. Blackmailers who saw him as a walking payday. Scammers who weaponized his family's trust. Angry citizens who branded him a moral disaster and wrote to Washington demanding action. Threats, rumors, and schemes that never made the front pages, but did make it into the filing cabinets. And if you love Elvis, that's where the files hit hardest. We're used to thinking about his struggles in terms of prescription pills, a grueling schedule, a controlling manager, and a lonely man inside a big house called Graceland. But now you have to add something else to the list, the knowledge that somewhere out there were federal memos and complaint letters with his name printed at the top, treating his life and art like a national problem to be tracked. It doesn't make him a saint, it makes him more human. Because behind every page in those files, there's a man trying to sing, trying to act, trying to hold onto some sense of normal while other people use his name as a weapon. Against him, against their kids, against a culture they were terrified of losing. And maybe that's the real power of these so-called classified documents. They don't give us proof that Elvis cheated death or lived as a secret agent. They don't show a mastermind pulling strings behind the scenes. Instead, they reveal something quieter and, in a way, more profound. How big his shadow really was. Big enough that housewives wrote to Hoover in panic. Big enough that scammers built entire schemes around his fortune. Big enough that his jet, his skin, his concerts, and even his hip movements ended up on government paper. So the next time you watch him on stage, smiling through the sweat, or see a grainy photo of him shaking hands in a suit, remember this: somewhere far away, behind locked doors and steel cabinets, his name was being typed into federal files, one page at a time. Not because he was an enemy of the state, but because he was a reminder that one man with a microphone can shake a country so hard, even the FBI has to write it down. If these FBI files made Elvis feel more real, not less, tell me in the comments what surprised you most. Do you believe the truth is enough? Or do you still think there's more we haven't seen? Hit like, subscribe, and stay with us for more untold Presley stories.